بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Inshallah, today is to talk about the Islamic Studies foundation, and this is coming from a specific background. So, just briefly, the agenda, inshallah, will be tackling the learning outcome or expected outcome as a learning. There is Horizon's vision that was kind of renewed recently, and we need to emphasize it as in this perspective. There is introduction that tackle specifically why we need conceptual foundation. So there is 4 item here. Is about the mission of the Islamic Studies Committee that it took this in charge and worked on this kind of scope and concern. There is we talk maybe briefly about the methodology for loading this research. And there is some dimension of the foundation that we want to talk about. There is some empirical finding. It's not theoretical work that we are talking about it here. It's more to bring it to the ground and see how it fits our data, our reality, and our kind of way we are teaching or the way we are dealing with Islamic studies. Then, based on that theoretical framework and the finding data, we are framing the problem to make it contextualized and to making it kind of specific to our case. And then there is kind of proposed prototype, and we talk briefly if the targeted kind of audience and the key player to move this foundation ahead. So as learning outcomes from this perspective, we're talking first about this item about the awareness of our crisis. It's not awareness, general awareness. It's more to be specific and to see what are the aspects of the crisis you have in order to talk about it in terms of a gap. If we keep talking about crisis without identifying the items and the facade and what is the gap, it will keep there as negative talk about our Islamic studies. So this is kind of move ahead a little bit to see what is the Islamic studies, what crisis we are suffering from in this area, and how we can look at it in terms of alternative and how we can move ahead. So there is Horizon's vision, new vision. We'll just tackle it briefly, and it will be kind of, this is kind of iterative and redundant work that need to be done in order to take meaning and to take shape. There is some design thinking, just to refer to it as the way we are tackling this work as a methodology, and we adopted the design thinking methodology here. So we'll talk about it just briefly to give you kind of whatever kind of big titles there. Then there is this mission of the Islamic studies to contextualize the work. So if we are looking at what's happening, we contextualize it based on some objectives that was taken by a group in order to achieve something. And we need just to have it in mind, because it helps the process. It helps what could be done and how we can deal with it. It helps our interaction with what is the material here. There is some difference between the curriculum and foundation that we will be talking about it soon, and there is this dimensional framework that we're talking about, and this has kind of 8 dimensions on it. And there is this framing of the problem, and it's summarized in terms of major 4 key items that we will be talking about it and identifying it and linking it with those dimensions that we start with. And this is the last one, is Horizons proposed kind of meta model for the foundation of Islamic studies. Meta model is just what is this foundation has as a shape, and what are the tools, what are the component of this foundation. So this is kind of meta model, because you are not applying the foundation in order to teach. You are using your foundation in order to have a curriculum that you will be teaching with. We'll start talking about Horizons New Vision. It's developing leaders through transformational learning. So we are talking about leaders and transformational learning that need to be taken care of in terms of development. So Whatever we are doing in Horizon Academy is just to make that happen, to make that development of those leaders comes out of transformation of their life, transformation of their identity. And this transformation, it comes through their learning, through their maturity, advancement, and their progress in looking at how they are moving in their taking their responsibility and acquiring the meaning in their life. So this is kind of the vision, and we want it to be reflected in all the work we are doing. We want it to be assessment tool that will stop us if we are doing something beside that. We want it to be driving us as we are thinking about our task that we are dealing with, or about people that we are working with, or about about kids, or the audience that we are inviting to provide this service to. So we are providing this service of development based on the transformations. We are not forcing by some specific intellectual or spiritual or preaching kind of tool to force the people in their mind the way they think, or their emotion the way they feel, or their action the way they behave. So we need just to mind that it's transformation that comes from within, and you need to enable it as actor playing a role within Horizon Academy. So as introduction, and I will be talking mainly about the why of this conceptual foundation and from where it's coming. So tackling the Islamic studies as area, it's a big question, big concern, and big challenge. So how you can tackle that area where the perspective of the people is not aligned, and maybe the view of what should be done is not comprehensive enough, and you see the gaps here and the gaps there, and wherever you are bringing still not kind of at least tackling the minimum kind of requirement, and it keeps changing the way you want it to be moved. So there is something that you need to look at and to build it a little bit properly, which is the foundation, which is what is this conceptual foundation you want to use in order to move ahead in your building, in the building of your curriculum or your curriculum. So, and this foundation, you need to mind it in terms of aligning, in terms of building this key element you want to have. Why it's conceptual? It's conceptual because it has kind of two aspects on it. It has some philosophical aspect, it has some practical aspect. So it's not dry as some ideas in the sky, but it's linking the concepts and linking them in a practical way, so we can look at our reality from progress and from improvement perspective. So a curriculum is a set of courses constituting an area of specialization or discipline, but each curriculum requires foundation to be built around. So either you have it explicitly or you have it implicitly. And if you have it implicitly, maybe it's not even clear in your mind. If you have it implicitly, maybe it's not shared. Maybe if you have it implicitly, you cannot even measure it or talk about it. So you need to talk about it, you need to identify it, you need to look at what is missing there in this foundation you are coming from in order to come up with that curriculum. Most Islamic institutions are blindly adopting available textbooks without minding their philosophy and foundation. We are reducing our effort as institution dealing or acting in the Islamic studies to bring what is the best textbook, what is the new one, where is the illustration in terms of pictures, where is the illustration in terms of some titles and some attraction and some and we may miss the big component if you are missing what is the message you want to move with, from which goal, and how you want to deliver it. So the lack of a clear foundation causes us to be misaligned even when using the same textbook. And that we see it in many kind of occasions when we look at different institutions, at different classrooms within the same institutions. And you see that they are using the same textbook, but the stories are emphasized from two different perspectives, maybe opposite sometimes, bringing the fear of Allah out of the scope of His mercy, or some type of teaching that you can feel that is depend, and it's risky. It depends to the mindset of the teacher, and this is the misalignment. This is the phase that you may miss if you don't have kind of foundation that help you guide in at least the background, the view, and what are you targeting from your delivery. Fourth item here, I have the foundation is prerequisite for effective curriculum. How you can measure that your curricula is close to the ideal, close to which ideal you have in mind, from which perspective you're talking about, in order to tell me or to tell to anybody or to the parent, besides saying things that maybe you're not knowing what you're talking about. So in order to be the mastery guys that, or the master institution that they are delivering, they know what they are delivering and why they are delivering it and what is the target. It's kind of missing the point, and we may keep doing the same as long as the new textbook is getting out into the market and we are adopting it, as long as there is a new CD-ROM and new website and so on. And having a clear and unified foundation, it's empowering. As a teacher, once you have this foundation clear in your mind, you feel the boundaries where you can play to effectively deliver what should be done. So the textbook is just a helper at that time. The textbook as material is just a support that you can stick with some elements on it and go beyond it. And once you are doing your lesson plan, you are going a little bit in your comfortable kind of effort to look for something that nurture the foundation, because textbook is never perfect to be 100% aligned with the foundation that you are coming from. Having clear foundation is prerequisite for the assessment of the effectiveness of the curriculum via longitudinal kind of monitoring. While you are monitoring your progress and your evolvement, you can tell that you are moving toward getting closer to your ideal, or you are getting far from your ideal. And that will help, at least in terms of that kind of improvement and progress. So in terms of committee that took in charge this building this foundation and putting some effort to shaping it and making some sense of it, we have kind of we had 5 people that they put a lot of hours there and worked through academic material to get familiar what was the question there. Even if we are dealing with Islam, sometimes we find out that we are way far from what are the big questions dealing in that area and how we can even tackle them. So we have kind of Hisham Badi, Hatim Fadlullah, that he was coordinator a couple of years ago, Ali Nasser, well known in Calgary, Sharif Sharqawi, who's the coordinator of Islamic Studies in Horizon, and myself. So the goal we took to start this work is to develop a foundation for Islamic Studies curricula that is consistent. It's not about the curricula here. It's more about the foundation that is consistent with our vision and based on set of critical dimensions that includes educational philosophies, historical developments, psychological explanation, societal influences, and name it. Even some elements that's coming as a relationship between them, and you need to come up what should be, how this should be linked with each other and how they are linked with your reality. So coming up with this goal in mind to be open to what's there in terms of requirement, not in terms of fancy area to adopt under Islamic studies, or just for the luxury to use some buzzword and buzz concepts in order to make them part of our Islamic studies. No, it's a little bit go beyond that and question why we need to add this area as one of the components in this Islamic foundation and why we're not. And that was kind of the work that was coming back and forth, gathering the material, gathering the data from the ground, dealing with teachers, dealing with students in Horizon and outside Horizon, capturing some interviews with some leaders in the community about what their view about the Islamic studies, in order to mind it and to look at it from these theoretical questions to see where is the gap. And it was really helpful as a team to work on those areas and to come up with something that we, inshallah, will say that it was, alhamdulillah, at some point successful. And we want your feedback and your raising your concern question about what we will see today, inshallah. So as methodology, this is what we adopted as a path dealing with these questions and how we were moving. So this is kind of design thinking in action based on the perspective of the Islamic studies kind of foundation that we did as a team. So coming to the foundation, those are the dimensions. This is the Islamic studies, and we went through this landscaping, as we said, and we start looking. In the beginning, we have in head, oh, the teaching approach is a big deal. We need just to change our teaching approach, and we will get our Islamic studies, wow, in well-shaped kind of field. And we start reading. And by opening our mind, opening our curiosity, and looking at different perspectives, we start looking, oh, maybe even our goals are not even clear. Are we just building people to be this good Muslim? What does mean good? I don't know. Or to be kind of effective people that can change our reality and have a role in our society. We don't know even how we can link them that way with whatever we are delivering to them. And then we start looking at the goals. Then we start looking at the models, and we start figuring out that there is no only one model, and there are many models there. And then by moving, we start looking at the methodology, or even the methodology should be shaped. And we had this confusion in our head between methodology and the model as content at one point. And then looking a little bit further, we could identify that the methodology in Islamic studies, not methodology of the research of this effort that we have today. Here is the methodology of approaching the Islamic material as teaching material. There is Islamic material, there is Islamic concept, how you can approach it as teaching material in different time, in different perspective, in different context, and in from different view, kind of, and for different even goals sometimes. So, and then we start looking, we start discovering that even the environment, it shape you differently from behavioral outcome or academic outcome. And then how the environment is linked with these two factors. What is the correlation between the environment in order to say that you are shaping people in terms of behavior, and you are shaping them in terms of academic outcome? And it's two different assessments here. Which area you are assessing and which environment you are using for which goal you are targeting. And then comes into the picture our holistic view that we are not coming here only to say that we are Muslim and we are doing our prayer and we are moving ahead and we are reading our Quran, to see our responsibilities in the society as a Muslims, not as whatever background. As a Muslim, when it comes to the pluralism and when it comes to citizenship. And we start looking at that time how we can bring those elements with the effort of others. Only with ourselves we will fail, and we will fail miserably. No doubt about that. And how we can have a view where the stakeholders has a place in the way we are dealing with this material. knowing that the field of the religion is not about how much you know. It's about how much you change and you transform based on what you know. The gap here is the change uh, kind of from the view of what you know, not how far you knew before and how far you knew now. This is the different two a type of assessment, and this is kind of the elements that bring the religiosity and bring it clearly here when we have those interviews and we have people talking. Oh, you know, as religion or kind of imam leader in the community, our teaching of the Islam, it's moving just to feed information, and we don't change, we don't see the behavior changing, and it's puzzle because we don't know how to do it. We don't know how we keep kids hours in the classroom without changing their behavior, except changing some ideas if we can, or bumping some information in their head that they will forget, or they will get walls built on their head based on this information that we are dumping in their heads. So as a goal, and this is only questions here, we are not bringing here answers. Just as a goal, we start looking at different fields and how people they are talking about the goals, and you start looking at even the goals are different. Even the goals between people looking at the Islamic studies and which goals they need to target, they are diverging. For example, just I'm starting with this question here: has contemporary Islamic education been able to produce citizens who can think critically and innovatively when dealing with challenges of our time? That was kind of always like he's expecting, or whoever is saying the question, expecting that the Islamic education should bring the critical mind and the innovation in dealing with challenges of the time. Maybe it's valid, maybe it's not, it doesn't matter. But this is kind of perspective that's coming from this type of questions. There is another question: has it been able to produce citizens who possess good hearts and live by Islamic value, whatever Islamic value he has in head? And then that's kind of questions, and we need people that they are diverging, and there is some narrow kind of perspective there. Some of them talk about the criticality, some of them talk about innovation, some of them talk about their involvement in the society in order to be citizen. Some of them are talking about the Islamic studies should be developed to be relevant to the contemporary needs of the modern world in light of the principles of Quran and Sunnah. So now we'll go even a little bit ambiguous. What is Quran and Sunnah, and how you want those principles to be reflected in the contemporary needs by bumping or whatever, dumping the information and the type of behavior we are expecting from the people, or by getting them involved in order to come up and extract from within what should be done. And there is kind of different questions there. Maybe in this kind of scenario here, we put it in the quadrant, not to blessing it, but just to bringing it in the kind of one of the statement that we can see and look at. Ideally, Islamic education is holistic, where knowledge is produced by revelation and human experience, where we see that the factor of human is part of the Islamic studies. The knowledge could transform through various human faculties such as mind, heart, and soul. And this is kind of binding with some level of questions we have with the leaders in the community in the Islamic or kind of field. And the domain of knowledge are interconnected and produce Khalifa. What is Khalifa? And what is the role of this Khalifa? Who might rule? Look at that, rule. It's like it's coming from ruling, and ruling, when it comes to the society, you are governing. This is what does mean ruling, and how far you are using and that perspective as a goal. The world with justice and peace. And there is kind of mix of the goals, a mix of the perspectives, a mix of the dreams, a mix of the projections in the future. And we need to look at this type of goals. And this is the area where when you see the field, or you are doing the landscaping, you will start looking at these elements and the nuances between them. And you need to be sensible here in order to see those nuances. And you need to look at the nuances, because this is what matters most, and to build what is your goal. in terms of institution, in terms of organization, dealing with the Islamic teaching. When it comes to the model, and this is another type of questions that once you start looking at the different Islamic teaching model. I'm talking about the model that they are used in terms of teaching Islam, teaching the concepts of Islam. If by not knowing the models, if I'm telling you what you are teaching, oh, I'm teaching the wahi, I'm teaching the aqidah, I'm teaching the akhlaq, I'm teaching the ahkam, I'm teaching the fiqh al-Islami, or the intellectual school of the Islamic field, and I'm teaching the history, and I'm teaching the culture, and I'm teaching. This is how you can enumerate it or list it. And this is what we can put it as category in the subject matter model. And this is what we could find from the textbook perspective. Whatever textbook you put in your hand and you start moving and looking at different pages, you see that this model is manifesting itself in a lot of aspects of the way we are looking at the Islamic studies. When you are going and looking at the Islamic studies in different institutions, all of them are coming from this perspective, just to at least in terms of categorization of the learning that they are delivering. Now it comes the question, how far this model is appropriate. And it's not for the sake of argument, oh, this is the model that we find even in the yellow book or the Kutub al-Safra or whatever scholar they were using. Yeah, that's fine. They produce whatever they need to produce in order to build the fields and the elements of the field of the Islamic studies. Now, once you have those fields kind of segregated, how far are you going to look at them in terms of kind of aggregation or integration? How far we are moving from the segregated field in order to build differences by bringing the integration or the aggregation in those fields. And this is what we see, at least as a human experience, from segregating the technology from the medicine until we find ourselves facing the segregation issue, and we need to bring them back together to biotechnology or whatever fields. And we need to mind this human experience in the way we are looking at the fields, in the way we are projecting our experience there. And this is when we start looking, oh, are there different models? Yes, there are many. But at least as a relevance in our context, we have a relational model. And the relational model, it's building the teaching based on type of relations that you are building, not based on the Tawheed, Al-Uluhiyya or Rububiyya, which are two segregated fields that you can even lost yourself and the way you think about Allah in terms of what is Uluhiyya and what is Rububiyya, and you get even lost. And then you need to look at it once you are dealing with this Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So how far you are bringing this relationship on terms of relationship, not in terms of kind of identifying with segregated fields. And this is kind of different perspective, because once you start looking at different model, you start looking at different views. You are start looking at different perception. You are start looking at different questions. You are start looking at different assessment of the people that you are delivering them this material. You start looking at different impact. It's not how far they know the boundaries between fields. It's not about how far they know about the definition of each field. No, it's more about the building the sensitivity about the type of relationship, about the depth that you are dealing in terms of this relationship, about this type of kind of empowering or positive relationship that you would have, or you may have, if you have the guidance in order to build it. And this is type of models. There is, and there we highlight kind of relationship with creator, humans, animals, oneself, environment, and so on. And there is a kind of different type of model, which is called kind of a cognitive model, which is moving from the knowing to the doing, and doesn't stop there, to the being. And this is kind of transformational. You see that level of transformation. You come up with something that needs to be understood and grasped and mastered in the way that lead to some level of actions, which lead combined to some level of transformation of the being. So That's different perspective. When you start looking at your material, are you, even if you are looking at it from cognitive model, how far are you pushing it in order to be understood and to be adopted as actions or to be supported as transformation? That's kind of questions that you may have if you are looking at the alternatives. If there is another one, which is the faith, devotion, and the good deed, you are coming, it's most closely to the subject matter, but it's a little bit different. It's about this devotion, which comes in the center to link two areas there. So just I want to have that as question in our head. So when we are talking about the crisis, we are talking about not the crisis in terms of depression or deception, but talking about the crisis in terms of identification, what type of elements we want to look at, and how we can deal with it. There is this inquiry-based learning, and here we are looking at the goal. And once you start doing the landscaping, you start doing, based on your goal, you need to adopt different way to deal with your learner. If based on the goal, if you want them to memorize more, the inquiry-based learning, maybe it's not the way. And if you want them to be transformative, as we have as a vision, and you want them to come up with this transformational learning, you need to bring it from within. And what does mean within? They need to inquire the question, to own the path, and to look at themselves as free elements moving by themselves, at least from one area of awareness to another area, but at least it's coming from within. And those decisions, those questions, those actions, those responsibilities, and those meaning are owned by the individual in order to incorporate them. So you cannot start talking about transformational without start talking which way you want to deal with the learner in order to bring that transformation into the play, to making it happen. And this is from where it's coming, that inquiry-based learning. So inquiry-based learning, if we have different goal from Islamic studies, we need to take a look at the position. Are we going that way or opposite way? And we are bringing it here as a question. We didn't decide yet. Is it the right path to bring in it or not? But we find it as one of the elements in the landscape. And once you start doing this research and looking at different fields, you start looking at it and you see how it is linked with the model, because coming from the segregated model, which is subject matter model, which you need just to master the definition and the boundaries, maybe you don't need it much. But once you start talking about the relational model, that time you need really to look at the way you are delivering your material. Is it by building this relational shape coming from within or imposed from outside? And this is where the inquiry-based learning have a place and required, and even imposed itself to be part of your movie, and it will not be removed either by alienating it or by adopting it. So here it is like there are levels in the query-based learning. They are kind of depend on the area of the progress, and they are not. I'm listing them here. Kind of they are harmonized ways. No. There are debates around them. Some of them, they are pushing toward authentic intellectual work. Some of them are pushing toward discipline-based inquiry, and so on. And I'm listing them here, the project-based learning and what is difference between the project-based learning and discipline-based learning. There is a problem, there is problem-based learning, there is design-based learning, and there is challenge-based learning. And there are different orders. It's like you can just look at the authors there. They are different and coming from different perspective, and not all of them are coming to build the same component. They are even criticizing each other. And you need to look at it in order to see in which perspective you are moving from the buzzword inquiry-based learning to the practical adoption of the tools and the process in order to make that whatever learning you have based comes from within and comes to transform and comes to make that behavior change and view change and perspective change and make that member as human evolving. and improving itself and in terms of level of maturity. And this is kind of a question that we had. And another question here, which was kind of fascinating when you start looking and have kind of open minded looking at different options and different questions, you start discovering the area that you never even thought about them before. And here, one of the research here was talking about the impact of the environment in two ways. One way is in terms of learning outcomes or academic outcomes, and one of them in terms of kind of behavioral impact. And we find that kind of environment, it plays different role there. So the students' religious behavior impact are most strongly influenced by learning process. And this is the environment, the way you take the environment, you take it either from process perspective or you take it from dumping kind of information and criticizing the concept as they are. Not in terms of process, you find yourself moving either toward behavioral impact or toward learning outcomes or academic outcomes. So let me just say it in English. So this environment, it could be adopted either in terms of process, and that process, it leads by having it as a way to deal with the environment that you are using toward kind of religious behavior impact. Or you can deal with it, and I can even read the second one. Learning the outcome result are more strongly influenced by the religious atmosphere and environment in the school. It's just environment of religiosity rather than the learning process in the school. So there, it's like this redundancy. You are dumping the same information here and there in order to make it clear in the head, visualized in the eyes, and wherever the guys are looking at, they are looking at the same redundancy. What make specifically happen for them? The mastery and the remembrance of that element, which is the academic outcome. It's not related mainly with their behavioral change. What affects them in terms of behavior is the process you are teaching them. And here you see the link and the requirement where the environment, when it comes to the process, you are involving them, the process, you are delivering your material, the process, you are getting them into step by step in order to deal with that material, lead to their behavioral change. But by building some redundancy and some religious environment and some school, kind of religious school and environment, you are building their academic outcome. So are we more about the academic outcome, or are we more about the behavioral impact? This is kind of change. Are we exclusive? This is another question. How we can balance, are they the same? Maybe yes, maybe not, but we need to take position. And transformation, we know what does mean. It's not about how much you know. And this is, we need to have kind of clarity about it in order to come up with some level of decisions. How far we can work on our process and perfect our process in order to make the behavioral change with some level of redundancy in order to make that academic outcome happen. And this is kind of question. It's not, they are not leading to the same outcome by default. And we need just to understand that. So coming from this environment, I move a little bit to the methodology here. And talking about methodology, we have the schools that will put your kids in the kind of the floor and bring some table in front of it, and having the teacher looking face to face to him, and having the Quran kind of repeated again and again. And this is one way. And this kind of traditional approach, and maybe he's teaching them even some meaning, even he's against using any projection, he's against using any whatever. It's traditional kind of approach that's dealing with transferring the knowledge, or the knowledge management, if we can call it in our way, or our time using that terminology. But it is a traditional approach where the kids is framed based on on specific setting, specific semantic, and specific hassle that is dealing, or empowerment or happiness that he's dealing with once he's sitting dealing with this material. And this associating or anchoring the relationship with the material based on the setting, it takes shape. It takes shape based in terms of acceptance. It takes shape in terms of interactions. It takes shape in terms of internalization on the rejection. And that's time we need to mind it, because it's not neutral. The setting is not neutral. The way you are giving them to interact with that material, either digital way or book way or visual way or whatever way, it's not neutral. You need to mind it. The way you're talking to them is not neutral. The language you're using with them is not neutral. And this is where it comes, this methodology. When you are looking at that perspective, and you look at the traditional approach, maybe we are not that traditional, but are we really not traditional by using some specific words that we can hear while you are going from classroom to another one? Are we really minding the way we are delivering the Islamic teaching when we are using Khalid ibn Walid everywhere as one of the leaders? I'm not against it, but please mind it. And this is one of the traditional approaches. The modernist approach, and the modernist approach here, it comes as considering the contemporary Western thought and its worldview as necessary for a modern culture and civilization to be built. So this is kind of the modernist not only in terms of tools and setting, but you are going a little bit no boundaries of modernism, where you are even maybe dealing with your religion, conceptual religion, from the eyes of the outsider. You need to keep an eye as insider, and you need to bring the outsider when it's minded. But you are insider. Don't deny that. And this is where the modernist approach can have some limits. And then there is this eclectic approach where it has two paths on it. This eclectic approach that wants to bring the Islam as worldview, how we are looking at other people, how we are looking at the other disciplines, how we are looking at the other lifestyles, how we are looking at the other kind of movement and the humans as supremacy there. And this is Islamic supremacy, as we are talking about the white supremacy there. And this is the Islamization of the knowledge, and where it was criticized. And even when it was reformed, it still have this level of supremacy. You cannot consume anything unless if you processed through this machine. And you need to mind that. To which extent you want that to happen in order as controller. And if you have a weak machine, and you want it to process big data, your machine will crash. But the big data is a fact. It doesn't mean the big data is truncated. It just means your machine is not able enough to process that big data. So you need to don't process anything through your machine. Be open to deal with the data in order to have some peer-to-peer interaction with the data, and don't consume it unless if you process it with your whatever machine you have. And this is a big issue anyways. And there is the second element where the Islamic kind of perspective, it comes as peer-to-peer, dealing with other fields, as interaction, as debate, as kind of criticizing and getting the criticism toward us too, and look at both ways. And this is different area. This is kind of opening, liberating way to deal with other fields, either modernist or not. And this is kind of questions that we have once you start doing the landscaping, you start looking at those type of questions. There is these stakeholders, and I want to bring it here since we start looking at those type of elements and we start looking at the type of extending the learning as level of building the environment, either process environment or redundancy environment. You start looking at the stakeholders, how they can help building the environment you want to have in order to get the right outcome you are aiming for. And this is kind of question when it comes to the stakeholders. So stakeholders impose itself in terms of Islamic field learning, in terms of religious education, how far you can deal with the religious education in isolation. And this is was kind of the big question there. So if you are dealing with that, how far you can deal with it with integrating other people? And this is the second question that comes in the other side of the field that you're looking at. So while you are approaching the stakeholders, you are bringing the questions. You are bringing the questions how I can integrate them, how I can get them with me, how I can get in them involved, how I can use them or they are interacting with them in order to make that learning extended in terms of manifestation, either aligned with or against with, and whatever path it takes, how far you are dealing with that level of interaction in order to build the learning you want. So that's type of question, and we start looking at how you can map your stakeholders. So at one point you need to map them, and by mapping them you need to look at what type of interaction you have with which type of category you have as stakeholders. And the question that comes here, are you dealing with the parent as stakeholder the same way as you are dealing with the assistant teachers? Are you dealing with the people helping you within a school as volunteer the same way you are dealing with the people that maybe they are not coming to school and they have kind of some level of interaction or exposure to your institution and you want to get them involved? The other question can come into the plate, how you are dealing with institutions, other institutions as stakeholders, not only individuals. Are you dealing with them the same way as you are dealing with individuals and you are approaching them based on case-by-case level, or are you building something institutionalized and planned as activities in order to make that kind of interaction with those type of stakeholders effective? And this type of questions, it happen once you start looking at this field, how the stakeholders come into the plate of Islamic studies and what type of crisis we have in our schools or in our program to deal with this component. Are we happy with the way we are dealing with this component? If we're not, or if we are, that's fine. But if we're not, how we can deal with this component? Which type of understanding we need to have? Which type of involvement we need to have there? Do I need to be involved as individual teacher and go and bring some stakeholders, or how synergize I need to be with the institution in order to making it happen in the constructive way? And this is kind of questions that comes into the field. It's like when we are talking about the Islamic studies, is not the teacher's business only. The teachers is only one element there, and we need to have that clear. When it comes to the pluralism, and here this is one of the fun parts that you can deal with it once you start dealing with the Islamic teaching, because you cannot pass by. You cannot start looking at the field of Islamic studies and you can skip those pages where they are asking the level of interaction you have with outsiders. Outsiders in terms of belief, outsiders in terms of group, outsiders in terms of movement, outsiders in terms of religions or whatever, ideologies or whatever you want. What type of interactions you have? That's a big question. And are you, which channel are you looking or are you using to look at them? If you are using the salvation and the truth as two criteria to look at other people, you need to be fair. And you need to mind that the salvation is not exclusive for Muslims. And I am inviting people to read Hamid Ghazali for that. So the salvation, which is al-atq min an-nar, is not exclusive. and you need to know it even after Islam. It's not before, after. And then there is that debate that you need to face in terms of your creed. The truth is not belonging to only Muslims, and you need to face it. And without facing it or building some whatever sculpture in the head of the people, you are building those walls. You are doing some distraction there, and you need to be aware about it. And I'm talking here about the creed as a level. And when you're looking at the truth and salvation, they are not the same thing. We need to decouple them, because the area of the truth and the area of salvation, they have some commonality between them, but it's not mapped one-to-one. And we need to face that. So which level are you dealing with other people to bring the truth, and which level you are dealing them as humble, to be humble, that you're not only the one that could be saved. I'm not sure if you are saved or not. So that's kind of question that you need to bring once you start looking at this field. It's not the pragmatic way. No, don't judge people. It's easy to say. But if you have people in front of you and you are telling them you are the one, that you are Muslim, that you will be in the Jannah, and the other people are in the fire, high fire, like, what are you expecting as outcome in terms of thinking in that head that is in front of you that will happen looking at the other people? And we are doing something that is at least against the truth. And this is one of the areas that the field we need to face, and we need to look at it when it comes to the Islamic studies. And this is kind of the, at least in terms of evolution and our history, to be fair, we have three paths, and two paths, it was kind of, you can read about them in every book, I mean, in the Islamic intellectual field, either exclusivism or inclusivism. And the exclusivism is like the people that they are saying Islam and only Islam. And the Islam is not, we don't mean it in the Din and Allah. Islam is not the only Islam, it's the Sharee'a of Islam. And this is exclusivism, and it was manifested by context by Ibn Taymiyyah. And the inclusivism that was manifested at least with Al-Razi and Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. And we know that they are scholars. And once you start looking at the scholars, at least in terms of this concept, there are some opposite views there. And when you are looking at the landscaping in terms of pluralism, you need to be aware what's happening. Otherwise, you will promote some non-truth to the people. And now we're talking more about the pluralism as coexistence, which is kind of evolution a little bit from inclusivism to something more about pluralism, which is the coexistence of the truth, multiple truths, and coexistence of salvation, multiple salvations there. And this is in terms of creed, in terms of belief, in terms of the way you think and the way people need to think, at least from this perspective as question in this landscaping research that we are dealing with. How far you are embracing this view, and this is the question that you want to come up with when you start looking at your foundation. And foundation means your curriculum that will come out from your foundation. And it's founded even in the Islamic view in terms of research and landscaping, and not only from the creed view, it's founded also from the theological view, the ethical view. When we start talking about akhlaq and the ethics, when you extend it in the level of the thinking and the possibilities, you will say to yourself that it's not true, that I'm only one that has the big truth or the main truth. No. And there are multiplicity of the truths. Once you start to be fair, the ethical bring you to look at the reality, and you will see that there are many truths and you need to deal with them, and many salvation, and you need to look at them. And the interpretation that you have in your head is not the only interpretation. And the question that will come out of that, which interpretation you want to embrace? And that's kind of another kind of extended question. And when it comes to the application of this pluralism, which way you want to practice it? So now, are you practicing it in isolation, as silos within your classroom, in the corner, and teaching them that all the religion is good, whatever, and you are teaching them how they think and how they don't think? Or are you thinking, or are you bringing it in terms of interaction, in terms of openness toward other people, in order to learn how to learn the truth from others? And this is here, there are two levels. There is identificational process and there is this dialogical process. Identificational process is how far you need to know about yourself to identify what could be different with others. And you need to start with that as a work from the perspective that there are other views, not from the perspective that this is the only view. And then when you start with that, you extend it to dialogical process. And this is kind of extended or kind of advanced phase where you are institutionalizing the pluralism as a process within your Islamic studies. And that's kind of question. How far are you looking at the field without this component, and how far you are looking at it with this component? So citizenship was one of the components that we faced when we started dealing with the Islam as mission and looking at the Islamic studies, how it deals with that Islam as a mission which goes beyond the individual. And which means you are not going beyond the individual to say, I want other people to be under my umbrella. No. It's beyond the individual in order to say wherever principles are respected, I'm with them and I face them and I am promoting them. And wherever those principles are not there, I'm against them and I'm working against that movement in order to bring those principles back as a human. And that's big. That's big as involvement. And how you want people that you are dealing or delivering the Islamic studies to them to have this view as a responsibility. And based on that, as meaning, define the meaning doing it. And here I would like just to bring the elements, foundational element of that view here of the Islamic studies when it comes to the citizenship. So one of the elements here is discern in its own discourse the position of these values in its own theology and history, so that we or our student or our audience no longer perceive them as foreign bodies. So once you start looking at the society and the component of the society, we need to look at our theology and framework. What is the essence dealing with outsiders in terms of group, organized group? The citizenship is organized big group. Is a state, is community, is a city, or whatever kind of you can bring the level of the organization there. Is the movement within the society, and you are looking at the citizenship in front of that or facing that. So what you are doing, you are looking at your own perspective dealing with لتعارفوا, for example, that we have one of the concept لتكونوا شهداء على الناس. This is another concept, and there are many concepts there. Or even going with hadith, for example, خيركم للناس, so and so on. So this coming from internal view to discern your own discourse, the position of those values. You are promoting values here, promoting to be working with others to move ahead, everybody, to help them and to contribute and to look at that from within. And you need to bring that into the surface. So we are not looking at that by making people alienated toward their own principles. We are linking them with their own principles in order to extend the meaning and to contextualize the meaning. And this is the work of the Islamic studies. This is dynamic component in Islamic studies. How you can contextualize the meaning of the concept and the element of the principles that you have, to give them context, to give them extension, to give them continuity, to give them perspective and projection. And this is one of the big elements when it comes to the citizenship. Citizenship doesn't work in isolation. Oh, we need to be good citizens, seeing the truth and respecting the laws and stuff. And this is part of our religion because it's good to be respected as you is good to respect others. No, it's beyond that. It's a little bit more not in defensive ways. It's a little bit more in progressive way. You need to look at it, and you need to bring those elements into the surface as first, at least, step where you are not alienating people. And the second step is to achieve this goal. Muslims need, through education, an increase in democracy and experience with democracy, to be able to think freely and without suspicion and to express themselves. It's not kind of we are targeted, we are victim, and we are close. We are not even open to talk about whatever suffering we have, or misunderstanding we have, or missing our needs that we are dealing with. No, it's by exposing, having the trust of the interaction, and going forward with the principle of democracy, because this is the extension of the meaning, and you need to mind it. You need to mind it from within as a truth. This is the extension of some level of meaning that you may have in your internal world of Islamic teaching, and you need to look at it from that perspective. It's not something that comes in the surface and it goes with the surface. No, something is deep, is rooted, and you need to look at this root in order to give it contextualized and in order to be respected in terms of relevance. So you are not using specifically old word in order to give it context. Oh, I need to bring it as a shura in order to have a meaning of it. No, bring it as a meaning, express it as words, modern words, but the meaning is what is counter. The third element there is build a sense of participation and contribution toward enriching the vision of peace, solidarity, and beyond the efficacy system. Efficacy system, it's big concept here, where you are with the democracy when your community is suffering, and you are not with the democracy when other communities are suffering. And this is the efficacy system. As long as the system is, if it has some efficacy toward my needs, I'm with it. It's beyond that. And we need to mind that. And we need to embrace it fully in order to move ahead. So which position are we taking in Islamic studies, bringing this type of concept and questions, dealing with this concept of citizenship? With some authenticity, I mean, not surface dealing with it. And here just I'm bringing some elements from the landscaping kind of that we were dealing with. The active citizenship refers to a form of participation in civil society and in social, economic, political life, which is characterized by mutual respect and non-violence, and is in accordance with human rights and democracy. So I will just move, and I will try to move a little bit faster in the second one. So what we did based on those dimensions, we did kind of an exercise that took us kind of weeks to make the mapping between the empirical data that we were gathering from the ground and people and around us, leaders in the communities, students in Horizon, outside Horizon, and teachers in Horizon outside, and so on. So we gathered this data and we started doing the mapping, and by doing the mapping, we guided through the process of gap analysis. So while we are doing the mapping, we are mapping the insights coming from the people against the dimension or the question that we have and we identify in our kind of theoretical kind of work, or at least the question that we bring from theoretical work. So, but I will not go through the whole details of those findings, as I will mention some of them, and I will go to the summary by itself. So as one of the findings, that students need to be taken in a journey of Islamic education that goes beyond coping with the situation, rather to build their own fulfillment and link it with their roles and responsibilities in the society. So this is kind of a little bit heavy, but this is kind of statement comes from many elements that reflect not having the fulfillment as a goal when it comes to the students. Another kind of element here, the students need the Islamic topics to be presented and framed to touch the essence of their fulfillment and responsibilities, because the subject matter model is not more framed for more the way the Islamic science are structured in the history. So that was kind of an issue. That's how we are mapping the goal based on the model, and it brings some kind of uncomfortability dealing with type of fulfillment while we're talking about the transformation of the leaders. Another element here, like students need to have the setting processes and system that help to make the teaching internalized, the setting matter, the wording matter, the language matter, the process of the teaching matter. So how they are looking at it, and they are kind of how we make that helping the teaching to be internalized and affecting their behavior first, then their academic learning outcome as a second. Here another finding: students, parents, and teachers need to approach the Islamic studies from practical action-based view instead of theoretical view. There was kind of dilemma, and people kind of framed their concern in terms of this question. We see a lot of kind of information back and forth, but we don't see change in the behavior. We don't see that movement. We don't see this capitalization on the maturity. Whatever he get in whatever level, maybe he's going down into another level, and so on. Teachers need to have well-defined assessment tools and success measures to monitor and adjust the delivery of the material, respecting the goal and the standards of the program. This is kind of another issue here that was kind of coming from the assessment tools and how we can measure the success. It has to do with the goal. It has to do with the model you are adopting. It has to do with the teaching approach that you are using. It has to do with your environment, how you're emphasizing, and what side of environment you are emphasizing. It has to do with other elements, and you need to be aware of it and how you can deal with that. Here, for example, another element before I move on with the summary: students need to be engaged in incremental education, dealing with the pluralism in stemming out of their belief, intellectual understanding, and communication-based behavior and actions. And there it was kind of provoking questions that were asked about how far you are in the right side of the goal, manifested in practical and actionable manner. So this is another element that was coming, rooted in the depth of understanding. There is some depth there. This is some depth in acquiring the information, understanding it, and making meaning and sense of it, and translating it in terms of action and practical view. There is open enough to interact positively with other frameworks, as disciplines, other movements as ideologies, and religions, and other group of societies, and processed through inquiry, critical, personalized learning, which bring the internal view of the learner in the surface as priority, and participatory based aligned involvement, which makes that this journey is coming not by ourselves, by involving all who we can involve in order to make that journey happen and that learning extended, and making it really kind of something that makes the behavioral change welcomed. So it was framed in this diagram or visualization here. So there is fulfillment and responsibility centered as a goal. So if what we are looking at, we are looking at some fulfillment and responsibility as a goal, as a problem which is missing. If we are dealing with other disciplines, with other groups, with the society, we are dealing with the openness. So this is one element, and here it's like you can start feeling how the theoretical dimension are aggregated and grouped under big problems that we are discerning at this stage. Practical, spiritual, and understanding. So this is another area that was coming, and what has underneath, I will get into that. It's like the model. It has to do with the methodology too, and you need to look at it Without your model and methodology, you cannot bring some practical spiritual understanding. Inquiry personalized learning, and this is where your teaching approach and your environment are involved. So both components in your dimension are coming to bring the right question in order to look for the right solution there. And participatory aligned involvement, it brings maybe 2 dimensions at least, or 3, if you want to get the pluralism as one of the dimensions there. But at least the citizenship is there, and at least the stakeholders element is there. And you need to mind that, how you are making this participatory aligned involvement. So this is kind of how we are mapping the framing of the problem with the theoretical dimensions. So the goal is mapped to this lack of the fulfillment and the responsibility centered. The openness is mapped to the methodology, ideology, and society. Practical understanding, there is a model kind of involved there, there is a teaching approach involved there, and there is methodology involved there. And do you remember the methodology? It's where we are doing not traditional, not alienation with the modernist, but something electrical, but not with supremacy, but with peer-to-peer interaction. That's kind of methodology that we talked about. Inquiry personalized learning, where we are talking about the teaching approach, that we went through those 6 elements of the inquiry-based learning. There is this methodology behind it, and there is this involvement. Which type of involvement, environment involvement there? You are involving the environment as emphasizing the processes, or as are emphasizing the redundancy. And the same thing for the participatory aligned involvement when it comes to the stakeholders and the environment. So I'm moving here to get into some sense of opening the door about some light that we see, at least as a group, when we were drafting this issue, and we come up with this problem, and we start mapping our ideas. So the ideation here, it's get removed or get skipped, as we skipped the gap analysis between data and theoretical framework. So we're not looking at the whole puzzle here, but whatever we can skip in order to get to the essence and the relevant part, this is what we are doing today in this presentation. So we remove the ideation components in order to get into the prototype. So we are in the phase of prototype in the cycle of design thinking. So in terms of design thinking stage, doing the prototype is when you are dealing with your ideas and perspective in order to solve your problems, I mean, in terms of selective way to build harmonized solution. You need solution, and you are building harmonized solution. Maybe you come up with option, maybe you come up with 2, with 3, but you need to build something that can work together. And this is what we call prototype. So this prototype, it has these elements on it. I will skip all the discussion between the framing of the problem and the prototype, and come into this meta model, where we are putting the goal of our prototype. If we are moving ahead with foundation that help us in the curriculum, we need to define the goal of our Islamic studies. And if we are defining it, we need to define it in terms of fulfillment and responsibility. So it needs to be really specific and fulfillment responsibility driven. Don't define the role in terms of whatever concept you have in head, or whatever generic words, right Muslim, authentic believer, whatever you can come up with as kind of goal. You need to be more specific, beyond those words, beyond those generic stuff. Go deep to define what is the level of fulfillment I'm targeting, and which level of responsibility I'm aiming for by the end of this program, regardless if it's 3 months or 3 years or 10 years. So, and that will guide you in all other elements. It's governing problem. It's center problem there. Without your goal, you will deal with your practical understanding and spiritual practices differently. And you need to look at that. So starting from the goal, you are defining the scope, you are defining your KPIs, how you are measuring the fulfillment, and how you are measuring the responsibility that you are aiming for. You are defining the tools that you are adopting for that specific program, and you are defining some success factors in terms of change of behavior you are aiming for. So that one, you define it here clearly as a goal, and then you go to your practical understanding and spiritual practice as first element in your path of defining the curriculum. So you are coming here, this is the foundation. It's guiding you to ask, where is the practical understanding and spiritual practice based on this goal that you just defined? And then practical understanding, it has also the scope, KPIs, tools, and success factors. How you can measure that you have some practical understanding and spiritual factors embedded in your program. And the same thing, it will happen to the next phase, where we are questioning, I'm doing inquiry personalized learning, which level? Is it problem solving inquiry-based learning? Is it design inquiry-based learning? Is it challenge inquiry-based learning? Is it discipline? What type of level I'm questioning in order to make that concrete, not fluffy words? And you need to define it based on specific criteria, and I'm coming to the criteria after that. And there is the openness, and once you start talking about the openness, you are starting talking about explicit way to deal with other disciplines as peer-to-peer, with other groups as peer-to-peer, with other ideologies and religions as to peer-to-peer, to target the truth and to exchange the common and to debate the difference. That's your actor, that's your factor. This is how you are manifesting as individual that find meaning and taking responsibility. And this is, you need to have it based on whatever components you are targeting in the program. And the same thing will happen for the participatory approach, where you are looking at the stakeholders and your environment, how you are involving the people around you and how you are involving the institution around you, starting from the mosque, starting from other organizations, starting from non-Muslim organization, if you want, in order to build that and design those experiences and interact with them, either in the formal way on how we are dealing with that. And you need to define it. You need to have it clear. And if you are taking any position about it, taking it clear and explicitly. But you need to mind that dimension there. So moving toward those different levels of your foundation that will guide you looking at any program or curriculum, you need to mind as essence the teachers and the delivery process, because you are delivering that material through people. And those people, if they are not able, or if they are not sharing, or if they are not aligned, you will miss everything. It's not about putting that in words. It's not about putting that in documents. You need to put it as a process. You need to put it as manifestation of whatever it's coming. So this is where we are talking in this blue stuff here, the teacher and staff continuous education, in terms of alignment with, at least with the foundation that is empowering them, and with specific program that is implementing. Or they are involved in implementing. So I'm just moving a little bit. I already covered a little bit those kind of elements. I will give some details, but I will not stick to that. So when it comes to the goal, which we have here, which is goal fulfillment and responsibility, is level of interaction between hierarchy of meaning and hierarchy of responsibilities. You are building your program in order to trigger which level of responsibility you are taking on your shoulders to grab which level of meaning. And that acquiring that level of meaning will push you to take an action, which is another level of responsibility. And this is the framework where this kind of it's psychology, it's theory there. Anyways, between getting people involved as having a meaning and taking a responsibility. And I don't want to get into the details, but having that in mind, when you are building or looking at any existing program, what type of responsibility we are triggering to grab which type and which level of the meaning. And that type of meaning, we are not dumping it. They are acquiring it. And this is kind of question there. I'm moving to the second layer, which is the practical understanding. The practical understanding, it comes basically from the model. And this practical understanding, spiritual practice, or الفهم العملي and التطبيق التجربة الدينية أو تطبيق السلوك الديني, it's built on the model. And you need to look at your models in order to build them based on specific mindset based on specific perspective. And what is this perspective? Is to have some faithfulness embedded in your program. You are not faking kind of your design in order to make that behavior happen. No, you need to be faithful. And to be faithful, you need to question the meaning of what you are teaching, and to question how you are delivering it, and to question how authentic it is. And this is the faithfulness. And that faithfulness should not make you blind around the systemic approach about what you are teaching them. And the systemic approach is the relationship between those elements that you are pushing, those elements and the context that they have. There are layers and there are hierarchy. So the faithfulness will not make you making everything flat in the same level. Be faithful, minding the relationship and making it in hierarchy. Hierarchy in terms of what is the goal, what is the why, and what is the tool, what shape you, what give you the mean and the tool. And you need to mind what is the priority and at which level, building the discipline. And as you are building that discipline, you need to mind this approach. You are not coming as literalistic. If you are coming as literalistic, you will feel miserably approaching this model in implementation. You are questioning your understanding of the hierarchy of the values you are approaching in your curriculum. And this is kind of big question, and we needed to be minded here. So while you are doing the relational model, we are promoting as prototype here the promotional model to be served by cognitive model. So the center is a relational model that will define the content, that will define the boundaries. And once you are delivering it, you are delivering it in terms of cognitive model because you wanted the being to be transformed. You can talk about the relational model in terms of Asma Allah al-Husna, but you're making it only on the understanding level or the emotional level. But if you are pushing this Asma Allah al-Husna in order to making it push toward cognitive model, where is the knowing and where is the doing and where is the being? And then there you will start talking. What is the difference between Asma Allah al-Husna, Asma al-Uluhiyya wal-Rububiyyah, and so on? Does it really make sense? Or I'm emphasizing the type of relationship and the quality of relationship with this creator in order to make sense of some knowing that triggers some doing. And that doing will go together in order to make new being, human being. That's type of question when you start moving from the relational model to be served by this cognitive model. And we need to be aligned here because there are big discussion here anyways, but that's the content and this practical understanding and spiritual practices comes from specific perspective, which is relational. It's not segregated. It's not about aqaid and sharee'a. It's not about akhlaq and fikr. It's not about wahi and al-fiqh. No. It's coming to the level of minding the differences in order to interact, getting them in interaction, building a relationship. You are building on the top of that differences. You are going a little bit beyond in order to make that relationship happen and highlight it. So this is kind of where I was talking about the fulfillment and the responsibility here. I talked about this practical understanding and spiritual practices. I want to talk about this inquiry-based learning, and I want to make it kind of personalized inquiry-based learning that maybe go beyond the boundaries of inquiry-based learning because the field by itself is not well defined anyways, but there are models within it. And by looking at their models, we want to have this flexibility to inquire in it from behavioral change perspective. So the prototype is promoting 3 layers of inquiry-based learning. One, it's called discipline-based learning with the people that they are new in the discipline. One, it's called problem-based learning and reflective learning for the people that are medium and they already know in the material, but they are shaping their view within that material. And one, it's called challenge-based learning when the people are mastering the material and mastering the discipline, but they are getting another level of maturity, how they can use it freely from their personalized experience. This is kind of a little bit advanced. And just as perspective, I will not stop on each one of them, but whenever you are talking about these models, it comes from some general understanding of the discipline to some personalized meaning of this discipline. So there is general understanding and personalized meaning. The general understanding need to generate some personalized meaning in order to make that manifestation of the fulfillment and the responsibility happen. Without personalized meaning, you will miss the fulfillment and responsibility. And this is happen for the discipline-based learning. It will happen from the problem and based learning or reflective-based learning, and it will happen for the challenge-based learning. When it comes to this problem-based learning or reflective-based learning, just two words here. The problem-based learning is reflecting on the future, how you can use your material, adopting the same view as it is, but you are projecting it in the future. And this is kind of problem-based learning. I'm giving you a problem that you never faced before, and you need to look at it based on the view that we talked about it in this discipline, how you are projecting it as solution for this problem. So you are not innovating in a view, but you are innovating in the practice. So this is one thing. The reflective learning is you are looking at your past and looking at the past, either yourself or somebody else. So the experience already happened. And then you are looking as contemplation. So you are developing some capability of learning lessons from experience as problem-based learning to avoid issues happening again and again. And this is happening. This is so one it's future driven, another is past driven. The last one is challenge based learning. This is more for advanced stage in dealing with the discipline, and you are tackling it from perspective to bring new view. You are mastering the material. You have an issue as a challenge, a real challenge in the society. As a group of people dealing with this discipline within a school or within which program, you are looking at the problem and you are adopting it as challenge based learning to come up with new view how we can tackle it. And this is kind of, as we said, it requires some stages and some process, and I don't want to get deep there. That's what is about this personalized based learning. It has some assessment level, and this assessment should be minded in terms of feedback in order to design experience. So the assessment are not coming here to judge, but they are coming here to assess the readiness to move toward the next level. And here the assessment is not mainly the quizzes or whatever happen as test, but the assessment is happening as ongoing assessment. So you are using whatever activity as assessment in order to trigger the feedback, in order to identify the gaps, in order to design your experience until you get the people in the level of the maturity to move to the next stage. And this is kind of from where it's coming, this assessment. So you have stages, and you want them to move from discipline-based learning to the problem-based learning to some challenge-based learning, but within the same kind of concept or item that you are dealing with, you are using some tools in order to assess the maturity, in order to make that maturity happen before you move ahead. And that one will help them to acquire and to be ready to tackle and to acquire new meaning. Because without acquiring that new meaning, they will not see the light of new responsibility. They will be lost in that stage. And you want to help them to acquire that meaning with new design and experiences and gathering more feedback, and to be creative, to read what is the situation in order to help move on as personalized learning in order for them to acquire that meaning, so they can identify what is the new responsibility they are taking. So there is this two dimension that you need to mind while you are going as a goal. So the openness, just I will highlight those 5 items that we have here. So we have openness toward the tools and technologies and management tools, whatever tools you can adopt. It's not only about technologies, whatever tools you can learn in order to use in order to use in the setting of Islamic studies, because the setting matters. and it give them the acceptance or they give them the rejection. And it helps a lot when you mind your tools and you mind their level of mastering your tools. So don't adopt some technology that nobody even could use. And then there is the question, what is the limit of adopting these new tools and new ways, and what is the maturity to be used within the specific setting? And this is kind of things that we need to work on it in order to be open toward new things that's coming as setting and tools, and mind our lack of skills dealing with it. Extending the learning environment in terms of processes and in terms of redundancy. The prototype here is promoting both, but with priority. They are not in the same level. We are targeting the behavioral level, so we are giving more weight to the process than to the redundancy. And the redundancy, it could be expressed as religiosity environment, as wall decorated, as tools expressed, as music played at home, whatever tools we are helping them with, it's kind to bring that redundancy. But the process is the way we are stimulating their involvement within while they are dealing with the material. And here there are two questions. When you don't have enough time to interact with them, it's way better to have well performed process based environment, because you don't see them much, you don't control much the redundancy you want to give them, and on the top of that, you are targeting their behavior. So you need to look really how you can master more the process-based environment in order to make that stimulation happening within the short time of time frame, in order to make that behavior happen. So that's kind of prototype kind of proposition. Implementing dialogical pluralism, we talked about that in terms of dealing with other groups and ideology and society. Contributing in societal questions, mind the responsibility of the people, not only on the individual challenges, but also in the environmental challenges, how they are dealing with that, and how they are open to look at it from the meaning perspective and responsibility view. And the last one, adopting relevant material as openness. So we are adopting different personalities as example, different ideals as we are tackling the value that we are bringing in the teaching level, and we are not getting stuck with the same persons, with the same personalities, with the same topic, whatever examples we have in mind. We need to be creative and to bring from inside outside Muslim world in order to make the value that happen. It's not only happening under the umbrella of Islam, and we need to mind that. We need to have this kind of understanding, and this is kind of the prototype as we are pushing it, kind of thing. This is the openness in terms of religiosity. I will not get in back to it again, but we are promoting it as part of the solution in this prototype. But this diagram, as it is in terms of pluralism, it should be adopted in our school. In which layer? It's like, and in which level? Is it identical process or a dialogical process? And the last one, which is the participatory approach, and here participatory, it comes in terms of stakeholders, as it comes of involvement of other institution. And if I can visualize it, I will visualize it in two category of type of stakeholders. One is individual, one is institution. What you can do with individuals, you can have some interaction with them as orientation. What is your goal, how you work, what you want, and what you are building as outcome. And this clarity will help the stakeholders, because you are too specific, you are too clear, you are too kind of convincing. But if you are lacking that, what you will tell them? Nothing. Will tell them those generic responses. And then by having that and approaching them based on this umbrella, what you are seeking from their involvement, extending the learning, not only in the classroom, and source of feedback, because they are kind of tools of assessment, and the element of experience design. And the institution kind of category of stakeholders, you can approach them not in ad hoc, because it doesn't help for sustainability. You need to approach them in terms of formalized, institutionalized relationship, and planned activities with them. And this is where the institution should play a big role in approaching which group as experiment and how we can getting it expanded. What you will get for them, you are get shared platform as discussion, debate, whatever. You are getting the experience exchange. You are sending your students under umbrella of other institutions in order to have this openness and to have this interaction, helping that learning happen. You need to design new experiences as you are building new activities together. I will not stop on that one. This is kind of the process, how you are moving from one step to another one in order to get the curriculum. But this is the last slide. So this foundation meant to be adopted in the high level of the organization in order to make that path of change normal and with fruitful. So without adoption in the institutional level and the responsibility to take that foundation as process and as a tools to the maturity level and high kind of laying down the structure that will support this foundation and helping the resource, the abundance of the resource that could be triggered to work on this foundation by itself in order to making it kind of implementable and making that foundation monitored and assessed how we are moving it from one level to another one. This is kind of the first responsibility here. The second one is coming in the teacher. What is the level of interaction as involvement as individual? What type of responsibility you are taking and what type of meaning you are gaining by interacting with this material? So this is one of your goals, at least as individuals, and ourselves as individuals dealing with this type of foundation if we want to extend it and implement it. So this is type of involvement of the teacher, how they are getting involved, how they can provide help, how they can contribute, how they can criticize, how they can give in comments and be more creative, not playing the resistance layer in the organization. It's very big kind of component here. and وأقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله.